The sharp crack of the executioner's rifle echoed through the hollow chamber, reverberating off the cold stone walls. The human ambassador's pet, a creature of strange beauty with iridescent scales and multiple eyes, collapsed to the floor, its final cry silenced by the blast. The diplomat stood frozen, his gaze locked on the lifeless form of the animal, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. "I warned you," the Empire's officer said, his voice devoid of emotion as he wiped his hands clean of the bloodstains. "You should have kept your pets in check." The human ambassador, a man known for his diplomacy and patience, took a slow, deliberate step forward. His eyes, once filled with hope for peace between Earth and the Empire, now burned with a simmering fury. "You just killed a creature we hold dear, a symbol of the trust we've extended to your empire," the ambassador replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "And you think we'll simply forget this?" The officer shrugged. "It was a threat to the Empire's security. We acted in the interest of preserving order." The ambassador's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms. This was no simple misunderstanding. The act was intentional, a slap in the face to the alliance humans had so carefully nurtured with the galaxy's greatest empire. A pet wasn't just a pet, it was a symbol. To humans, it was a bond of trust, an embodiment of the fragile peace they had fought so hard to maintain. And now, it lay dead at their feet. Hours later, in the halls of the United Earth's capital, the aftermath of the assassination was being felt. The ambassador's report was circulating, and the shockwaves were already rippling through the highest echelons of human leadership. In a private chamber, members of the High Command gathered, their faces grim. "This is a declaration of war," General Ransom said, slamming his fist on the polished table. His voice trembled with anger, and his normally composed demeanor was cracking under the pressure of the weight of the incident. "They didn't just kill a pet, they killed a symbol. The question now isn't whether we'll go to war, it's how we'll make them pay." Admiral Carter, the head of Earth's Navy, leaned forward, her expression calculated. "A show of force is tempting, but reckless. The Empire has military supremacy. We can't simply throw our ships at them and expect victory. We need strategy, not just vengeance." "Strategy," General Ransom barked. "We've trusted them for years, bent over backwards to play nice, and they kill one of ours like it's nothing. If we let this slide, we'll be showing the galaxy that Earth is weak, that they can walk all over us. It'll be the end of everything we've worked for." Carter's piercing blue eyes met Ransom's, and for a moment, the tension in the room thickened. "What we do next will define humanity's future. If we retaliate, we have to make it count. A single misstep could spark a conflict we may not be able to end." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision settling over everyone present. Outside the window, the bright lights of Earth's shining metropolis flickered, oblivious to the storm brewing within. But the storm was coming, and it wouldn't be long before the world would be forced to choose a side. The human ambassador, who had returned to Earth only hours ago, was now standing before the council, his face a mask of sorrow and resolve. "I've been instructed to deliver humanity's response," he said, his voice firm. "The Galactic Empire must understand that the death of my pet was no mere casualty. It was an act of defiance, and we will respond accordingly." The council leader, a woman known for her level-headedness, sighed and looked around the room at the uneasy faces. "What do you propose?" she asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. The ambassador's eyes hardened. "We will strike at the heart of their empire. We will show them that humanity isn't something to be trifled with. They killed one of ours. Now we burn their worlds." A murmur spread throughout the room as the weight of his words settled in. There would be no turning back from this decision. Once the humans unleashed their fury, the war would begin, and there would be no guarantee of victory. "Then we begin the preparations," the council leader said, her voice steady, though there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Let's make sure we're ready." As the council broke up, the ambassador stepped outside, his breath visible in the cold air. His eyes, dark and resolute, gazed toward the stars. Somewhere out there, the Empire would be waiting. And when the time came, Humanity would make them regret the day they killed a single human pet. The explosion rocked the surface of the human colony, a brilliant flash that lit up the night sky and sent tremors through the entire settlement. Buildings crumbled in seconds, their structures helpless against the devastating power of the Empire's fleet. It wasn't just a military strike, it was a message. And that message was clear. Humanity was expendable. On the command deck of Earth's flagship, Admiral Carter stood at the helm, her fists clenched tightly behind her back. The viewing window in front of her displayed the tragic aftermath, smoke rising from the colony's ruins, the faintest signs of life being snuffed out under the Empire's firestorm. The crew around her moved in a blur, issuing commands, analyzing tactical data, but Carter remained still. The attack on the colony had been swift, brutal, and without mercy. This was more than just retaliation. It was an assertion of power. A warning. "This is their response," Carter muttered, her voice a low growl. "The Empire isn't playing games anymore." Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Harper, stepped up beside her, his face pale. "Admiral, the strike was precise. They didn't just target infrastructure. They took out key resources. We've lost contact with the colony's command center." Carter's eyes narrowed. A demonstration of strength. "They want us to know they can reach us anywhere, anytime. No negotiations, no mercy. This is war now, Lieutenant." The ship's communications officer interrupted. "Admiral, we've just received a transmission from Earth Command. They're calling for immediate retaliation. The Council wants answers, and they want them now." Carter nodded sharply, her mind already calculating the next move. The war had escalated faster than anyone had anticipated. No longer were they playing the role of peaceful diplomats. They had been forced into a corner, and now they would fight back with everything they had. Within hours, Earth's fleet had begun assembling. Ships of various classes, destroyers, cruisers, and the newly upgraded warships, prepared for deployment. Every human on board understood the cost of what they were about to do. Retaliation wasn't just about striking back. It was about sending a message to the Empire, one that would reverberate across the galaxy. At Earth Command, the leaders were already deep in deliberation. The Council's message had been clear. There could be no hesitation. The Empire's brutality couldn't be ignored. Humanity had been pushed too far. General Ransom, still furious from the earlier events, stood in the command center with a group of high-ranking officials. His face was hard, his jaw set in a grim line. "We've lost good people today," Ransom began, his voice barely concealing the anger that burned inside him. "But it's more than just a few lives. The Empire has declared war on us, and I say we give them hell." "General, you're thinking with your fists, not your head," Admiral Carter replied, her voice calm but firm. "We need to consider the ramifications of an all-out war. We don't know how far they're willing to go. We can't just react blindly." But Ransom was undeterred. "You've heard the news. That colony was one of our largest and most peaceful settlements. The Empire didn't just attack, they wanted to break us. They want to show the galaxy that humanity is weak, that we'll crumble if they push hard enough. But they're wrong. We'll show them the true strength of humankind." Carter met his gaze, weighing the gravity of his words. "Strength doesn't mean reckless abandon. Our fleet is ready, but we can't afford to lose control. The Empire's military is far more powerful than ours, and we can't fight a war of attrition." Ransom was already moving toward the strategy table, ignoring her caution. "We'll use our edge. Speed. Surprise. We can strike first, hit them hard before they realize what hit them." Carter stood silent for a moment, watching the general. She knew he was right. The longer humanity hesitated, the more their weakness would be exposed. But there's a cost to this kind of war, one that could tear the very fabric of their society apart. "Let's be clear about something," she said finally, her voice cutting through the tension. "This war won't just end with a few victories. It will be a long, bloody conflict. If we start this, we have to be prepared to finish it." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. The war was no longer theoretical. It was real. And once humanity fired its first shot, There would be no going back. "We're already in this," General Ransom replied, his voice firm. "We fight to win. We fight to survive." The council members nodded, one by one. As they prepared for the inevitable conflict, no one was under any illusion about the stakes. The Empire had made its move, and humanity had no choice but to respond. The war had begun, and Earth was ready to burn the worlds of its enemies. The human fleet was only hours from Empire space when the first message came in. "We are the Galactic Empire. We demand immediate surrender or face the full force of our might." The arrogance of the transmission echoed through every ship in the fleet, but it wasn't fear that gripped them. It was rage. They had expected this. But now, facing the Empire's wrath, the question was no longer if humanity would fight, but how much they were willing to sacrifice to win. Admiral Carter stood on the command deck, eyes focused on the star map in front of her. The fleet's course was locked in, and Earth's warships were closing in on the Empire's outer defenses. But even as they prepared for battle, Carter could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her. Revenge had a cost, and humanity was about to pay it. "Admiral," Lieutenant Harper said, his voice cutting through her thoughts, "our scouts report that the Empire is massing its fleet at their outer defense lines. They're preparing for a full-scale confrontation." Carter didn't look up. She knew the Empire wouldn't back down, not after the destruction of their colony. But what did they hope to achieve? Were they really ready for this war? "I want all ships on standby," she said firmly. "We're about to hit their defenses hard and fast. No hesitation. We make this attack count." The hours that followed felt like an eternity. The fleet navigated the treacherous outer reaches of Empire space, evading detection as much as possible, preparing for the clash ahead. Carter's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. On the one hand, there was the need for swift retaliation, for striking with overwhelming force. But on the other, there was the undeniable truth. The more they escalated, the less room there would be for peace. The decision weighed heavily on the crew too. Harper and the tactical officers could feel the tension in the air as the fleet closed in. The Empire might have crushed a human colony, but they hadn't expected Earth to be capable of such a brutal response. Were they truly prepared to burn entire worlds to prove their point? The first target was a key Imperial outpost, a strategic location on the Empire's border. Carter had chosen it carefully. It wasn't just a symbol of the Empire's military strength, it was also their weak point. The Empire was known for its arrogance, assuming they were untouchable. They hadn't realized how far humanity had come. As they approached, Carter finally allowed herself a moment of clarity. "This is no longer about justice," she whispered to herself. "It's about survival." "Admiral," Harper's voice came through once more, "we're in position. The target is locked." Carter straightened, her voice cold and calculating. "Execute the plan." The human fleet launched into action. The attack was swift, precise, an overwhelming force that tore through the Imperial defenses. The energy shields flared as the first salvo of weapons struck, followed by a wave of missiles that exploded in a brilliant cascade of light. Imperial ships, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, scrambled to retaliate. But it was too late. The human fleet had already made its mark. As the target exploded in a fiery burst, the reality of the situation set in. The Empire's outer defenses were shattered, but at what cost? Carter knew the Empire wouldn't simply accept this loss. They would retaliate with a vengeance. And once they saw the destruction humanity was capable of, there would be no holding back. "We've done it," Harper said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and unease. "We've hit them hard." Carter didn't respond immediately. She watched the debris from the explosion float through the cold void of space, her mind working through the next steps. The battle had been won, but the war had only just begun. "Prepare for the counterattack," she ordered, her tone resolute. "We can't afford to let them regroup. If we're going to survive this, we need to keep the pressure on." As the fleet turned toward the heart of Empire space, Carter couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that lingered in her gut. They had won their first victory, but the true cost of vengeance was yet to be revealed. There was no turning back now. The war was upon them, and humanity was ready to face whatever came next. The battle was over, but the cost was clear. The Empire's defenses had been shattered, and humanity had delivered its first blow. But as the fireball of their victory slowly dimmed in the distance, the weight of what had been unleashed settled in. The human fleet drifted silently in the void, the echoes of the explosion still rattling in their minds, as every ship prepared for the inevitable response. Admiral Carter stood on the command deck, staring at the readouts in front of her. The destruction of the Imperial outpost had been nothing short of devastating. But now, she could see the Empire's retaliatory forces already mobilizing. The scales of this war had tipped, and there was no going back. "Admiral," Lieutenant Harper's voice broke the silence. "The Empire has already gathered a second fleet. They're heading toward our position at full speed. Estimated time of arrival, 6 hours. 6 hours." Carter muttered, her voice sharp. "That's quicker than we anticipated. They're coming for us, all right." She turned to face her crew, knowing that the decision she made now would determine their fate. Every officer on this ship was aware of the consequences of their victory. The Empire would not let this go unanswered. And the next time, they would come harder. The next time, they would be ready. "Prepare for combat," Carter ordered. "We won't wait for them to strike first. We meet them head-on. Full combat readiness, now." The countdown to the Empire's counterattack was quick, but humanity had already positioned itself strategically. The fleet formed a defensive line, their weapons primed and ready. But this time, Carter felt something different. This wasn't just a tactical strike. This was going to be an all-out war. There was no room for mercy, no space left for peace. The enemy fleet appeared on the horizon, a dark shadow blotting out the stars. They were massive, more ships than Carter had ever seen in one place. A sight that should have been overwhelming, but instead it steeled her resolve. This was what they had prepared for. This was the war they had started. "We got incoming fire," Harper called out as the first volley of laser blasts lit up the dark expanse. "Brace for impact." The human fleet fired back, their weapons flashing against the darkness like streaks of vengeance. A massive battle erupted in the cold, silent space, the soundless roar of energy, weapons, cutting through the stillness. Each shot was a defiant scream in the face of the Empire's might. But as Carter watched the data streams flood in, she knew the full extent of what humanity had unleashed. The Empire's ships were formidable, their weapons far superior to anything humanity had ever faced. The struggle was no longer about proving strength. It was a desperate fight for survival. "Admiral, they're overwhelming us," Harper shouted, his voice laced with panic. "We can't hold out much longer. They're targeting our capital ships." Carter's eyes never left the view screen. "We don't retreat," she said, her voice cold with determination. "We push through." The human fleet fought back with everything they had, but the toll was immediate. One by one, the Empire's fleet tore through their defenses. Energy shields flickered and died, warships disintegrated under the intensity of enemy fire, and the crew of the ships fought desperately to maintain control. The battle felt endless. Waves of enemy fire rained down upon them, and for the first time, Carter began to feel the pressure of what had been set into motion. "We've lost 2 destroyers," Lieutenant Harper reported, his voice tense. "Our shield systems are failing. We can't last much longer." Carter's mind raced. There was no way they could keep up this fight and expect to win. They needed to escape, to regroup, and then launch the counteroffensive, Carter said, her voice steel. "Prepare the superweapon." There was a moment of hesitation before Harper responded. "Are you sure? It's untested." "It's our only option," Carter cut him off. "We end this now." The superweapon was humanity's last card, an untested, but incredibly powerful device capable of wiping out entire fleets in a single strike. It was a gamble, but at this point, they had no choice. "We've got one shot at this," Carter said, turning to her weapons officer. "Do it." The officer nodded, keying in the sequence. The ship shuddered as the weapon powered up, a massive energy pulse building inside the hull. Every human aboard knew what this weapon could do, and the fear was palpable. But it was the only thing standing between them and total annihilation. Superweapon firing in 3, 2, 1. The officer counted down. With a deafening roar that shook the very bones of the ship, the superweapon discharged. A beam of pure energy shot across the void, racing toward the Empire's fleet. The first impact was cataclysmic. The lead Imperial battleship disintegrated in a flash, and the shockwave ripped through the rest of the fleet like a wrecking ball through glass. The Empire's response was immediate and chaotic. Ships were lost, their once pristine formations scattering in all directions. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a turning point. Humanity had delivered the first blow in a new kind of war, and now the Empire would understand that humanity wasn't something to be crushed so easily. But as Carter watched the devastation unfold, she couldn't help but wonder, how much more would they have to lose before this war ended? The galaxy trembled as the remnants of the Empire's fleet limped back toward their core worlds, bloodied but not yet broken. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of Earth's flagship, her gaze unwavering as she watched the remains of their first major assault. Their victory had come at a heavy cost. Ships were lost, lives were shattered, and the once confident human fleet had been pushed to its limits. But it wasn't the physical losses that weighed most heavily on Carter's mind. It was the knowledge that the Empire wasn't finished, not by a long shot. "We hit them hard, Admiral," Lieutenant Harper said, his voice subdued. "But we know they're rebuilding. We've just angered them, not crippled them. And they'll come back stronger." Carter's eyes narrowed. "I know. The question is, how much further can we push them before they break us instead?" The news from Earth Command was as grim as Carter had feared. Despite the devastation of the Empire's fleet, the galaxy's largest military force was still intact, just scattered and rebuilding. The Empire's Emperor was mobilizing his forces, preparing for a counterstrike that would make their previous skirmishes seem like children's play. And every victory they had won came at the expense of precious time, resources, and manpower. The human fleet wasn't invincible, not by any stretch. The Empire's power was vast, its resources practically limitless. But for the first time in centuries, the Galactic Empire was truly on the back foot, forced to fight not just for dominance, but for its very survival. Carter had seen the reports. The Empire's retaliatory strikes would be more than just tactical. They'd be personal. The Emperor had something to prove now, and humanity had made a powerful enemy. Every fleet under his command was preparing for a full-scale invasion. And this time, there would be no mercy. "Admiral," Harper said, pulling Carter out of her thoughts. "We've intercepted a transmission. It's from the Emperor himself." "Put it through," she ordered, her voice steady. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the cold, calculating face of the Emperor. His eyes gleamed with malice, and his voice was a low, threatening growl. "Humans," the Emperor began, "you have made a grave mistake. You thought you could destroy us, but you were wrong. Your petty rebellions are nothing but a nuisance. Prepare yourselves, for your world will burn. The Empire will erase your existence from the stars." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only silence in its wake. Carter stood frozen, the weight of the Emperor's words hanging heavily in the air. They had crossed a line, and now they were the ones in the crosshairs. "How do we respond to that?" Harper asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carter took a deep breath, her mind racing. "We fight, but we do it smart. We don't have the luxury of underestimating them anymore. We need to know everything we can about their next move, and we need to be ready for it." The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings, intel reports, and fleet movements. The human fleet, now bolstered with additional warships and resources, prepared to face the coming storm. But Carter couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing catch-up. They had won battles, yes, but the war was far from over. As she studied the tactical maps, a chilling thought crept into her mind. What if humanity had already lost? The Empire's response to their strikes would be more than just military. It would be psychological. The Emperor wasn't going to stop until humanity was reduced to nothing. And with every passing day, Carter could feel the walls closing in. "We need to hit them before they hit us," she said, her voice firm. "Our next strike needs to be decisive. We cripple their command structure, disrupt their communications. We take out their leaders and show them that they're not untouchable. We don't give them time to regroup." Harper nodded, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "And if we fail?" Carter met his gaze, her expression hardening. Failure isn't an option. Humanity had crossed a line, and now there would be no retreat. The war for survival was on, and with each passing day, the cost of their defiance grew heavier. But even as the darkness of impending defeat loomed, one thing remained clear. No matter the outcome, humanity would not be easily forgotten. The Empire had made its mistake by underestimating them. And now, humanity would make sure the galaxy never made that mistake again. The last of the Empire's fleet fell into view, a massive armada that blotted out the stars. It was the culmination of everything Admiral Carter had feared. The Empire's last, desperate push to wipe out humanity once and for all. The ships were vast, their weapons more powerful than anything Earth had ever faced. But this time, Carter wasn't backing down. She could see the same defiance in her crew, the same fire that had fueled their fight from the beginning. This was no longer about revenge. This was about survival. "They've brought everything," Lieutenant Harper said, his voice tight. "We're outnumbered at least 3-1, maybe more." Carter's gaze fixed on the warships that approached like an unstoppable wave. They had no choice but to fight. There was no negotiation left, no room for surrender. The only way out was victory or total destruction. "Prepare for combat," she ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. "This ends today." The last gamble. The human fleet was ready. Despite the odds, every ship, every crew member, was poised to give everything. They knew this could be their final battle. No one believed they could win this war on sheer might alone. What they had, instead, was the one thing the Empire had never accounted for: relentless resolve. The first volley of Imperial fire came fast and furious, streaking through the darkness of space. Shields flared as human ships took the hits, but they held strong. Earth's new fleet was more resilient than the Empire had anticipated. But resilience wouldn't win this fight. It was strategy and cunning that would make the difference. "Engage at will," Carter commanded, gripping the edge of the console. "Don't wait for them to strike first. Let's hit them where it hurts." The battle erupted with a force that shook the very core of the universe. Every ship in humanity's fleet fired in unison, each shot a testament to the human spirit. They weren't just defending, they were attacking, trying to carve a path through the Empire's formidable defenses. But the Imperial ships were relentless, and their tactics were brutal. "Admiral," Harper shouted, "the enemy flagship is breaking formation. It's heading straight for us." Carter's heart skipped a beat. The Empire's flagship, a massive behemoth of metal and firepower, was a target they couldn't afford to ignore. If they lost that ship, the Empire would have nothing left to lose. And the Empire would destroy everything they had worked for. "Divert all power to the forward cannons," Carter barked. "We're taking that ship down now." As the human fleet concentrated fire on the flagship, the battle turned into a vicious tug-of-war, a clash of titans in the cold void of space. The flagship's shields were strong, but Carter's fleet had the advantage of surprise. The first strike hit hard, and then the second and the third. The flagship's shields faltered, then collapsed, and the crew aboard Earth's ships roared as the enemy vessel was torn apart. But just as victory seemed within reach, the Empire's remaining fleet surged forward, closing the gap in an attempt to crush the human forces. "Admiral, they're coming for us," Harper shouted. "We can't hold them off forever." Carter's mind raced, calculating their options. If they didn't act now, the Empire's final fleet would overwhelm them. They had one shot. The superweapon, still operational after their earlier strikes, was their last resort. It was powerful enough to decimate the Empire's fleet in one final blow, but it was a gamble. One misstep, and they could lose everything. "We used the superweapon," Carter said, her voice cold with resolve. Now, the countdown began, and the ship trembled under the strain. The superweapon powered up, its core pulsing with energy, ready to unleash the destructive force humanity had long kept in reserve. The battle around them raged on, ships falling on both sides, but Carter's focus never wavered. The Empire had taken everything from them. Now they would take their chance. "Weapon ready," the weapons officer called. "All systems go." Carter took one final look at the Imperial Armada before her. It was their last chance. If they fired and missed, they would be finished. If they failed to launch in time, humanity would be no more than a footnote in the galaxy's history. "Fire," she commanded, voice steady. The superweapon discharged, a blast of energy so powerful that it consumed the space between the human and Imperial fleets. The shock waves sent debris flying as the blast tore through the heart of the enemy armada, disintegrating entire ships in a flash of blinding light. The Imperial forces scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. Their command structure had been obliterated, and their fleet was in disarray. The Empire had been dealt a fatal blow. But Carter knew the cost. The superweapon had drained every last ounce of their power. The human fleet was on the brink of collapse. No more shots. No more reserves. They had nothing left. "Did we do it?" Harper asked, his voice barely a whisper. Carter watched the remaining Imperial ships falter. Slowly, one by one, they began to retreat, their once mighty fleet crumbling before them. The human forces had won, but at a price that would never be forgotten. The war was over, but the scars would remain. The Empire had been broken, but humanity had learned the true cost of victory, and it was a price they would pay for the rest of their lives. "We did it," Carter said, the weight of her words heavy with the realization of what it meant. "But it's over now. For better or worse, this is our galaxy now."